The sun burned like fire in the Arizona sky. For 3 months, not a single drop of rain had fallen on the reservation. Ayana knelt beside the dried-up creek that once brought life to her family's small farm. The cracked earth beneath her feet told a story of desperation. At 17, Ayana had already seen too much hardship, but nothing prepared her for watching her little brother Kota grow thinner each day. His ribs showed through his shirt, and his once bright eyes had lost their spark. Their grandmother, who everyone called Nana, spent most days lying on her mat, too weak to even sit up properly. "The corn is dead," Ayana's mother whispered, staring at the withered stalks that should have been tall and green by now. "Everything is dying." Ayana walked through what used to be their vegetable garden. The beans hung like brown paper. The squash plants had turned to dust. Even the hardy desert plants that had survived every drought before were giving up. On the reservation, families were sharing their last bits of food. Children cried from hunger. The government had promised supplies, but the wagons came less and less often. When they did come, there was barely enough for half the families. "Maybe we should move to the agency," Ayana's father suggested one evening. His voice was heavy with defeat. The agency meant giving up their land, their independence, everything that made them who they were. "Never," Nana wheezed from her corner. Even sick, the old woman's spirit burned bright. "This land holds the bones of our ancestors." That night, Ayana couldn't sleep. She listened to Kota's labored breathing and Nana's quiet coughing. Outside, the wind blew dust against their small adobe house. She thought about the stories Nana used to tell about the old days, when Apache warriors were feared and respected across the territory, but those days were gone. Now they were confined to a patch of desert that couldn't feed a family of rabbits, let alone hundreds of people. The next morning brought terrible news. Kota had developed a fever during the night. His forehead burned hot to the touch, and he could barely keep his eyes open. Ayana's mother held him close, rocking back and forth. "He needs medicine," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Real medicine from the white doctor." But medicine cost money, and they had none. The trading post owner had already refused to give them credit. The Indian agent was visiting other reservations. They were truly alone that afternoon while walking to the reservation's edge to gather what little wild food she could find. Ayana saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. Beyond the boundary fence, on the white farmer's land, she could see green fields stretching as far as the eye. Corn stood tall and healthy. Tomato plants hung heavy with red fruit. Workers moved between the rows, harvesting enough food to feed dozens of families. The contrast was so sharp it took her breath away. She had heard stories about this farmer, Samuel Morrison. People said he was the richest man in the territory. His ranch sprawled across thousands of acres with the best water rights in the region. While everyone else suffered, his crops flourished. Ayana gripped the fence wire until her knuckles turned white. The unfairness of it all made her stomach burn with anger. Here was enough food to save every hungry child on the reservation, growing just a few hundred yards from where her brother lay dying. She watched the workers, loading wagons with fresh vegetables. Some of it would go to the town market. Some would feed Morrison's large household. But much of it, she knew, would simply rot in storage while children like Kota wasted away. Walking back home empty-handed, Ayana made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't watch her family starve while abundance grew so close. Pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. "I'm going to see the white farmer," she announced that evening. Her father shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. We don't beg." "It's not begging if I offer to work for it," Ayana replied. "I'm strong. I can do whatever he needs." "These white men, they don't see us as people," her mother warned. "They see us as problems to be solved or threats to be controlled." But Ayana's mind was made up. That night, she sat beside Kota's mat, listening to his shallow breathing. Nana reached out with a trembling hand and touched her granddaughter's arm. "Sometimes," the old woman whispered, "we must walk into the enemy's camp to save our tribe. But remember, child, never lose who you are, no matter what they ask of you." As dawn broke over the parched land, Ayana prepared herself for a journey that would take her far from everything she knew. She braided her long black hair carefully and put on her best dress, the one Nana had made for her birthday. Before the sickness came, standing at the edge of Morrison's property, Ayana could see his big house in the distance. It was larger than 10 reservation homes put together, with white columns and green lawns that somehow stayed alive despite the drought. Her heart pounded as she walked up the long dirt road. Workers in the fields stopped to stare at her. A few made comments she pretended not to understand. But she kept walking, thinking of Koda's fever and Nana's worried eyes. This was her family's last hope. She would swallow her pride, face whatever humiliation came, and do whatever it took to bring home food and medicine. As she approached the grand house, Ayana whispered a prayer to her ancestors for strength. She didn't know it yet, but this desperate walk up Morrison's driveway would set in motion events that would change not just her fate, but the lives of everyone around her. The young Apache woman who had nothing left to lose was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is offer to help someone who has everything. The morning sun was already brutal when Ayana reached Morrison's property. She could see him in the distance, a tall figure in a white hat walking between rows of perfect corn. The plants reached higher than her head, their leaves rustling in the dry breeze. Her mouth felt like sand, but she forced herself to keep walking. Ranch hands working nearby stopped what they were doing to watch her approach. She heard one of them whistle low and make a comment to his friend. Another spat tobacco juice into the dirt and shook his head. Morrison noticed her when she was still 50 yards away. He stood up straighter, one hand moving instinctively to his hip where a gun usually hung. Even from a distance, Ayana could feel his suspicion like heat from a fire. "You lost, girl?" he called out when she got closer. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from owning everything as far as the eye could see. Ayana stopped at the edge of his cornfield. Up close, Morrison looked older than she had expected. Maybe 45, with sun-weathered skin and sharp blue eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they saw. His clothes were simple but well-made, and his boots probably cost more than her family made in a year. "No, sir," she managed, though her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "I came to speak with you." Morrison walked closer, and she could smell leather and tobacco on him. He was tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. Behind him, his workers had gathered to watch the show. "Speak about what?" he asked. Not unkindly, but without warmth either. This was it. The moment that would either save her family or destroy what little dignity they had left. Ayana straightened her shoulders and spoke the words she had practiced all the way here. "My family is starving, sir. My little brother is sick, and my grandmother is dying. We need food and medicine." She paused, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "I know you don't know us, and I know we have nothing to offer you. But I'm asking for your help?" Morrison's expression didn't change. Around them, the perfect corn swayed in the breeze, while the silence stretched out like a rope pulled tight. "I see," he said finally. "And what exactly do you want me to do about that?" The question hit like a slap. For a moment, Ayana's courage wavered. She thought about Koda's fever, about Nana's shallow breathing, about her mother's tears. Then she found her voice again. "I don't want charity," she said louder now. "I can work. I'm strong and I learn fast. I can clean, cook, tend animals, work in the fields, whatever you need." Morrison laughed, but not in a mean way. It was more like he was genuinely surprised. "You want to work for me?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know what people in town would say if I hired an Apache girl?" Ayana felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't know what they'd say, sir. But I know what my family will say if I come home empty-handed again. They'll say I let them down." Something shifted in Morrison's face. He glanced back at his workers, then at his house in the distance, then at Ayana again. She could see him thinking, weighing options like a merchant counting coins. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ayana. How old are you, Ayana?" 17, sir." Morrison nodded slowly. "And your family, they know you're here?" "They know I was coming to ask for help. They don't know exactly what I plan to say. I bet they don't." Morrison muttered. He took off his hat and wiped sweat from his forehead. This brother of yours, how sick is he? Very sick. He needs real medicine, the kind the doctor in town has. And your grandmother? She's old and weak. She needs good food to get her strength back. Morrison put his hat back on and studied Ayanna for a long moment. She could feel his workers watching, waiting to see what their boss would do with the Apache girl who had wandered onto his property. I'll tell you what, Morrison said finally. I'll send some supplies to your family. Food, medicine for the boy, but not for free. Ayanna's heart jumped. I said I could work. I heard what you said. Morrison held up a hand to stop her. But if you work for me, it won't be like the others. You'd live in my house, help my wife with the household. It's a big responsibility. I can handle it, sir. Maybe. You can. But here's the thing. If you take this job, you work for me for 2 years. 2 full years, no breaks, no visits home. You give me your word and you stick to it no matter what. The words hit Ayanna like cold water. 2 years without seeing her family. 2 years without knowing if Koda was getting better or if Nana was still alive. 2 years of living among strangers who would probably never accept her. That's a long time, she said quietly. It is. But food and medicine for your family isn't cheap, and training someone new takes time. Those are my terms. Ayanna looked past Morrison at his green fields, then back toward the reservation where her family waited. She thought about Koda's burning forehead and Nana's tired eyes. She thought about her mother crying silently while she cooked grass soup. Because there was nothing else. If I say yes, she asked, how do I know you'll really help them? Morrison smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Because unlike what you might have heard about white men, I keep my word when I give it. And if I work hard and do everything you ask, then in 2 years you go home with money in your pocket and the skills to take care of your family better. Than before, Ayanna closed her eyes and made her choice. When she opened them again, Morrison was still waiting. I can work to repay you, she said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. Whatever you need, for as long as you need it, Morrison nodded once, sharp and final. Then we have a deal, he turned to one of his workers. Tommy, hitch up the wagon. Load it with enough food for a family of 5 for 2 months, and ride into town for Dr. Peterson's medicine kit. The worker looked confused. Boss? Do it now, Morrison said firmly. Then he turned back to Ayanna. Go home and say goodbye to your family. Be back here tomorrow morning, ready to work. And Ayanna? Yes, sir? Once you walk through my front door tomorrow, you belong to this ranch. Until your debt is paid, make sure you're ready for that. As Ayanna walked back toward the reservation, she could hear the wagon wheels already turning behind her. Morrison was keeping his part of the bargain immediately. Now it was her turn to keep hers. She didn't look back, but she could feel Morrison watching her go. The young Apache woman who had walked onto his property that morning was about to become someone entirely different. And neither of them knew just how much that transformation would cost them both. The wagon reached Ayanna's family before she did. By the time she walked up to their small adobe house, her mother was already crying, but this time they were tears of relief. Sacks of flour, cornmeal, and beans sat stacked near their door. Fresh vegetables filled 2 wooden crates. And most importantly, a leather medical bag containing bottles of real medicine rested in her father's hands. How? Her mother whispered, looking at Ayanna like she had performed magic. I made a deal. Ayanna said simply, with the white farmer. Her father's face darkened. What kind of deal? Inside their small house, while Koda slept peacefully for the first time in weeks thanks to the medicine, Ayanna explained everything. She told them about Morrison's offer, about the 2 years of work, about living in his house. The silence that followed was heavier than the desert air. 2 years, her mother finally said. 2 years without seeing your face. It's too much, her father declared. We'll find another way. But Nana, propped up on her mat and looking stronger already after eating real food, shook her head. The child has made her choice, and it's a good choice. How can you say that? Ayanna's mother demanded. She's just a girl. These white people, they'll change her, make her forget who she is. No, Nana said firmly. They'll try, but they won't succeed. Ayana carries the strength of her grandmothers in her blood. 2. Years among them will teach her their ways, their weaknesses. She come back to us wiser and stronger. That night, the family shared their first real meal in months. Koda was already sitting up, the fever broken, asking for seconds, but the joy was mixed with sorrow. Everyone knew this was also a goodbye meal. Ayana packed her few belongings in a small cloth bundle. Her best dress, her winter shawl, a necklace Nana had made for her, and a small stone from the creek where she used to play as a child. Everything she owned fit in a space smaller than a saddlebag. Remember, her father said, taking her hands in his, you are Apache. No matter what they call you, no matter how they treat you, never forget that. And remember, her mother added, we love you. Every day for 2 years we'll love you and wait for you. The next morning came too soon. Ayana stood in the doorway of the only home she had ever known, looking at her family for what might be the last time. Koda, already looking better, gave her a small carved bird he had made from a piece of soft wood. So you won't forget me, he said. I could never forget you, she promised. Tucking the bird into her bundle, the walk to Morrison's ranch felt different this time. Yesterday she had been desperate and afraid. Today she was determined but heartbroken. Each step took her further. From everything familiar and closer to a world she didn't understand, Morrison was waiting for her at the main gate, mounted on a large bay horse. He looked different too, more formal somehow, like a boss rather than the man who had listened to her plea yesterday. You came, he said, and she heard surprise in his voice. I gave my word, Ayana replied. He nodded approvingly and led her toward the big house. Up close, it was even more impressive than it had looked from a distance. 2 stories tall with a wide porch, painted white with green shutters. Gardens full of flowers that somehow stayed green despite the drought surrounded. The building. Before we go inside, Morrison said, dismounting, there are rules you need to understand. Ayana waited. You'll work for my wife, Mrs. Morrison. You'll do what she tells you when she tells you without question. You'll live in the servants' quarters behind the kitchen. You'll eat after the family eats, and you'll speak only when spoken to unless it's an emergency. Each rule felt like a stone dropping into her stomach, but Ayana nodded. You'll be paid a small wage each month, which will go toward your debt. You'll have Sunday afternoons off to rest, but you don't leave the property, ever, for any reason. What? If my family needs me? Ayana asked. Morrison's expression hardened. Then you should have thought of that before making this deal. For the next 2 years, your family is my family. Your only loyalty is to this ranch. Before Ayana could respond, the front door of the house opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, and Ayana's breath caught. Mrs. Morrison was beautiful in the way rich white women were, pale skin, golden hair perfectly arranged, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime, but her face was cold as winter morning. So this is her, Mrs. Morrison said, looking Ayana up and down like she was examining a horse at market. This is Ayana, Morrison said. She be working for you. Mrs. Morrison descended the porch steps slowly, her eyes never leaving Ayana's face. Can she speak English properly? Yes, ma'am, Ayana said quickly. I wasn't talking to you, Mrs. Morrison snapped. Speak when you're spoken to. Morrison cleared his throat. Margaret, she's here to work, not to be insulted. And I'm here to run this household properly, Mrs. Morrison replied sharply. If she's going to work in my house, she follow my rules. The tension between husband and wife was thick enough to cut. Ayana realized she was already causing problems, and she hadn't even walked through the door yet. Show her to her room, Morrison told his wife. Get her started on whatever you need done. He turned to Ayana one last time. Remember our deal? 2 years. No matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, you gave me your word. Yes, sir, Ayana whispered as Morrison rode away toward his fields. Mrs. Morrison led Ayana around to the back of the house. The servants' quarters were clean but simple. A small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out at the desert. You'll rise at dawn, Mrs. Morrison said. Kitchen duties first, then whatever else I assign. You'll wash once a week whether you need it or not. And you'll never, ever enter the main house without permission. Ayana nodded, though inside she was already feeling trapped. That first day seemed to last forever. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, fed chickens, and learned that Mrs. Morrison's idea of proper work was very different from anything she had done before. Everything had to be perfect, and if it wasn't, she had to do it again. By evening, Ayana's hands were raw and her back ached. She sat on her small bed, holding Koda's carved bird, and wondered what she had gotten herself into outside her window. She could see the lights of the main house where the Morrison family was probably enjoying dinner together. Beyond that, somewhere in the darkness, was the reservation where her own family was safe and fed because of the choice she had made. 2 years suddenly seemed like a lifetime, but she had given her word and Morrison had kept his. Now she had to keep hers, no matter what it cost her. The first month at Morrison's ranch tested every bit of strength. Ayana had. Mrs. Morrison seemed determined to break her spirit, giving her the hardest jobs and criticizing everything she did. The other servants, 2 Mexican women named Rosa and Carmen, watched her with suspicious eyes. "Why did the boss bring her here?" Rosa whispered to Carmen in Spanish, not knowing that Ayana understood every word. "Bad luck," Carmen replied. "Indians bring nothing but trouble." Ayana pretended not to hear, but their words stung. She had saved her family, but the cost was becoming clear. She was alone in a world where nobody wanted her. Mrs. Morrison's 3 children treated her like she was invisible most of the time. The oldest, David, was 15 and acted like he owned the world. The middle child, Rebecca, was 12 and curious about everything. The youngest, little Thomas, was only 8 and seemed afraid of Ayana at first. "Why does she look different?" Thomas asked his mother one day, pointing at Ayana while she served their breakfast. "Because she's Indian, dear," Mrs. Morrison replied coldly. "They're not like us." But children have a way of seeing past the walls adults build. Within a few weeks, Thomas was following Ayana around when his mother wasn't watching, asking questions about everything. "Do you really live in teepees?" he wanted to know. "Some tribes do," Ayana explained, grateful for any friendly conversation. "My family lives in an adobe house like yours, but smaller." "Do you have war paint?" Ayana smiled. "Only for special ceremonies. Most of the time we look just like anyone else." Rebecca began listening to these conversations from around corners. She was at that age where she questioned everything, and her mother's explanations about Indians didn't match what she saw in Ayana. "Mother says your people are dangerous," Rebecca said one day while Ayana was hanging laundry. "Do I seem dangerous to you?" Ayana asked. Rebecca considered this seriously. "No, you seem sad." The girl's honesty was like a punch to the chest. Ayana was sad, desperately, deeply sad. She missed her family so much it hurt to breathe sometimes. She missed the sound of her grandmother's voice, missed watching Koda play, missed the way her mother hummed while she worked, but she couldn't show it. Any sign of weakness would give Mrs. Morrison more ammunition to use against her. The only bright spot in those early weeks was Morrison himself. Unlike his wife, he treated Ayana with basic respect. When he saw her struggling with a heavy basket of wet laundry, he quietly arranged for David to help with such tasks. When Mrs. Morrison complained about Ayana's Indian ways, Morrison shut down the conversation quickly. "She works harder than anyone else in this house," he told his wife one evening when they thought Ayana couldn't hear. "Whatever problems you have with her, they're not about her work." "It's not about work, Samuel," Mrs. Morrison replied. "It's about what people will think, what they're already saying." Ayana learned that the gossip in town was fierce. The rancher who hired an Indian girl was the talk of every store and church gathering. Some people thought Morrison had lost his mind. Others whispered darker theories about his motivations, but slowly, things began to change. It started with small moments. One morning, Rebecca left a book on Ayana's bed, a collection of stories she thought Ayana might enjoy. Ayana treasured it, reading by candlelight each night, improving her English and losing herself in tales of far-off places. Then, Thomas got sick with a stomach ailment that the town doctor couldn't cure. After watching him suffer for 3 days, Ayana approached Mrs. Morrison with a suggestion. Ma'am, my grandmother taught me about plants that help with stomach sickness. If you'd let me make a tea. Absolutely not, Mrs. Morrison snapped. I won't have you practicing your heathen medicine on my son. But Morrison overheard the conversation. That evening, when Thomas was crying from pain and the doctor admitted he was stumped, Morrison found Ayana in the kitchen. This tea you mentioned, he said quietly. How certain are you it would help? Very certain, sir. I've seen it work many times. And it won't hurt him? No, sir. The worst it could do is nothing. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Make the tea. Within an hour of drinking Ayana's herbal mixture, Thomas was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. By morning he was asking for breakfast. Mrs. Morrison said nothing. But Ayana caught her looking at her differently. After that, the household dynamics shifted subtly. Rosa and Carmen began including Ayana in their quiet conversations. Rebecca openly sought her out for stories about Apache life. Even David, the sullen teenager, began nodding hello when he passed her in the halls, but the biggest change was in Morrison himself. He started pausing to talk with Ayana when he found her working alone. He asked about her family, about life on the reservation, about Apache customs. His questions weren't mocking or suspicious. They were genuinely curious. Your people have been in this territory for hundreds of years, he said one day while she was mending fence near his office. Thousands, Ayana corrected gently. Thousands, Morrison repeated, like he was trying to wrap his mind around that length of time. And we've been here for what, 20 years? 30? Something like that, sir. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Seems like we could learn something from you, instead of always trying to teach you our ways. It was the first time any white person had suggested that her people had something valuable to offer. The comment stayed with Ayana for days. One evening, while serving dinner to the family, Ayana overheard a conversation that changed everything. Morrison was telling his wife about trouble with some of his livestock. Found 3 more dead cattle this morning, he said. That's 8 this month. Whatever's causing it, it's getting worse. Mrs. Morrison looked worried. Disease? Doc Patterson thinks so, but he can't figure out what kind. Says he's never seen anything like it. Ayana almost dropped the serving dish. She had seen exactly this kind of cattle sickness before, during her childhood on the reservation. Her grandfather had taught her the signs, and more importantly, the cure. But would Morrison listen to advice from an Apache girl about his valuable cattle? And even if he did, would Mrs. Morrison allow it? As she cleared the dinner plates, Ayana made a decision that would either earn her respect or get her thrown off the ranch. She was going to speak up, regardless of the consequences. After all, she had come here to repay a debt. Maybe it was time to offer something more valuable than just hard work. The next morning, Ayana found Morrison in the barn, staring grimly at another dead cow. His foreman, Jake Wilson, stood beside him, shaking his head. That's 9 now, boss, Jake said. Whatever this is, it's spreading fast. Morrison looked like a man watching his fortune disappear. Each cow represented months of investment, and he was losing them faster than he could count. Ayana took a deep breath and stepped forward. Mr. Morrison? Both men turned, surprised to see her there. Sir, I know what's killing your cattle, Jake Wilson snorted. Since when do Indian girls know about cattle disease? Morrison held up a hand to silence his foreman. Go on, Ayana. It's alkali poisoning, sir. I've seen it before. The cattle are drinking from water sources that have too much alkali in them. It builds up in their systems until it kills them. Morrison frowned. The doc said it might be disease. The doctor doesn't know cattle like we do, Ayana said quietly. My grandfather raised cattle for the Apache agency. He taught me the signs. See how their eyes are cloudy? How their tongues are swollen? It's alkali poisoning for sure. Jake Wilson looked skeptical. Even if that's true, what can we do about it? Cattle gotta drink. You have to find the source. Ayana explained. Test all your water sources. The poison one will feel slippery, taste bitter. Once you find it, fence it off and the poisoning will stop. Morrison studied Ayana's face for a long moment. You're certain about this? as certain as I was about the tea that helped Thomas. That was all Morrison needed to hear. Within 2 hours, he had crews testing every water source on his property. By evening, they had found the contaminated spring hidden in a small canyon. Where recent rains had washed alkali deposits into the water. Morrison fenced off the spring that very night. Within a week, no more cattle died. The crisis was over, and Ayanna had saved Morrison thousands of dollars. How did you know that when my own veterinarian couldn't figure it out? Morrison asked her privately. Because your veterinarian learned from books, Ayanna replied. I learned from people who lived with cattle for generations. Morrison nodded slowly. I'm beginning to think there's a lot my family could learn from you, and learn they did. Rebecca discovered that Ayanna could predict weather patterns better than the almanac, reading signs in cloud formations and wind patterns that her grandmother had taught her. David, despite his teenage pride, found himself fascinated by Ayanna's stories of Apache hunting techniques and survival skills. Even Mrs. Morrison began to thaw, especially after Ayanna saved little Thomas from a dangerous spider bite using a poultice made from desert plants. When the town doctor arrived hours later, he was amazed to find the boy completely recovered. Where did you learn such advanced medical techniques? Dr. Peterson asked Ayanna. From my grandmother, sir. She's a healer. The doctor nodded respectfully. Well, she taught you well. That boy could have died without proper treatment. Mrs. Morrison overheard this conversation, and something in her expression changed. That evening she approached Ayanna in the kitchen. I owe you an apology, she said stiffly. I judged you unfairly. No apology needed, ma'am, Ayanna replied. I understand why you were suspicious. No, you don't, Mrs. Morrison said firmly. I was afraid of what people would think, so I took that fear out on you. It wasn't right. It was the first real conversation they had ever had, and it opened a door that had been locked for months. As autumn arrived, Ayanna had settled into a rhythm at the ranch. She was no longer the desperate girl who had walked up Morrison's driveway 6 months ago. She was becoming something new. Someone who could move between worlds. Understanding both Apache wisdom and white society, the children treated her almost like family now. Rebecca practiced reading with her every evening. Thomas insisted she tell him Apache stories before bed. Even David asked her advice about practical things, like how to track animals or read weather signs. Morrison had begun consulting with her on ranch matters, recognizing that her knowledge of the land and animals often surpassed his own. He never made her feel small for being Apache. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in learning from her people's ways, but just as Ayanna was beginning to feel like she might belong somewhere between her two worlds, devastating news arrived. A rider came from the reservation on a gray October morning. Morrison found Ayanna in the garden and called her over, his face grim. There's a message for you, he said gently. The rider, an Apache man named Joseph, who worked for the Indian agent, looked uncomfortable delivering his news. Your grandmother passed 3 days ago, he said in Apache. She went peacefully in her sleep. Your mother wanted you to know that her last words were about how proud she was of you. The world seemed to stop. Ayanna stood frozen, unable to process the words. Nana was gone. The woman who had raised her, taught her, loved her unconditionally. Gone forever. And Ayanna hadn't been there to say goodbye. Morrison stepped forward. What is it? What did he say? My grandmother, Ayanna whispered. She died. Without thinking, Morrison put a hand on Ayanna's shoulder. I'm sorry, I know how much she meant to you. The kindness in his voice broke something open inside Ayanna. Tears she had been holding back for months came pouring out. She cried for Nana, for the time lost, for the loneliness she had carried, for everything she had sacrificed. Morrison let her cry, not trying to quiet her or hurry her along. When the tears finally slowed, he made an offer that surprised everyone, including himself. Take the day, he said. Go to the reservation. Say goodbye properly. Ayanna looked up at him, hardly believing what she heard. But our agreement... Some things are more important than agreements, Morrison said firmly. Take a horse. Go be with your family today. It was the first crack in the wall that had separated them for 8 months. As Ayanna rode toward the reservation that afternoon, she realized that something fundamental had changed. Morrison had shown her compassion when he didn't have to, kindness that went beyond their business arrangement. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Ayanna began to think that maybe, just maybe, she was more than just a debt to be worked. Oh. Maybe she was becoming something neither she nor Morrison had expected when they made their desperate bargain under the blazing Arizona sun. The trouble started on a cold morning in November, exactly 1 year after Ayanna had come to work for Morrison. She was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard horses thundering up the drive, moving fast and hard, through the window. She saw Sheriff Coleman and 3 of his deputies riding toward the house like they were chasing outlaws. Behind them came several townsmen, including the banker, the store owner, and Dr. Peterson. Their faces were grim and angry. Morrison stepped onto the front porch, still buttoning his shirt. "Sheriff, what brings you out here so early?" "Sheriff." Coleman dismounted heavily. He was a big man with a gray beard and eyes like winter storms. "We need to talk, Morrison." "About your Indian girl?" Ayanna's blood turned to ice. She stayed by the kitchen window, close enough to hear but hidden from view. "What about her?" Morrison asked, his voice carefully neutral. 20 head of cattle were stolen from Tom Bradley's ranch 2 nights ago, the sheriff said. "Tracks lead straight toward the reservation, Apache tracks." "And what does that have to do with Ayanna?" The banker, a thin man named William Hayes, stepped forward. "Everyone knows these Indians stick together." "She's probably been passing information to her people about which ranches are easiest to hit." "That's ridiculous," Morrison said flatly. "Is it?" Sheriff Coleman pulled out a folded paper. "I've got a warrant here to question the girl. I need to take her in for interrogation." Mrs. Morrison appeared in the doorway behind her husband, her face pale. The children gathered behind her, Rebecca clutching Thomas's hand. "You're not taking anyone from my property without proof of wrongdoing," Morrison said, his voice getting harder. "The proof is in the tracks, Morrison," Tom Bradley called out. He was a neighbor rancher, red-faced and angry. "Apache prints all over my property heading straight for the reservation. And everyone knows she goes back and forth between here and there." "She's been to the reservation exactly once in the past year," Morrison replied, "for her grandmother's funeral." "With my permission." Sheriff Coleman stepped closer to Morrison. "Samuel, be reasonable. Nobody's saying she definitely did anything. We just want to ask her some questions. Ask them here." That's not how this works. If she's innocent, she's got nothing to worry about." Ayanna knew that wasn't true. She had heard stories about Apache. People who went to town for questioning and never came back, or came back broken and beaten, guilty or not. Morrison must have known it too. "She stays here." The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut. Several of the townsmen had their hands near their guns. The sheriff looked like a man trying to avoid a fight but prepared for one. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Sheriff Coleman warned. "The whole territory is watching how you handle this. People are already talking about you harboring Indians. Let them talk," William Hayes spoke up again. "Morrison, think about what you're doing. Your business relationships, your standing in the community, is protecting one Indian girl worth losing all of that?" "She's worth more than all of your opinions combined," Morrison said, and Ayanna felt her heart skip a beat at the conviction in his voice, but Mrs. Morrison stepped forward, her face twisted with worry. "Samuel, maybe we should listen to them. If there's been a misunderstanding, surely Ayanna can clear it up." "Margaret, I'm thinking about our children," Mrs. Morrison said desperately, "about what this could mean for our family. Ayanna couldn't watch Morrison's family suffer because of her." She stepped out of the kitchen and walked onto the porch, her chin held high despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'll go with them," she said quietly, every eye in the yard fixed on her. Sheriff Coleman looked relieved. The townsmen looked vindicated. Morrison looked furious. "No," Morrison said firmly, "you're not going anywhere." "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate what you're trying to do," Ayanna said. But I won't let your family pay for protecting me. Ayana, I didn't steal those cattle, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've never stolen anything in my life. If answering their questions will prove that, then I'll answer them. Sheriff Coleman nodded. That's all we want, girl. Just some questions. But Ayana saw something in his eyes that made her stomach turn. This wasn't about questions. This was about making an example, about showing the territory what happened to Indians who got too comfortable around white folks. Morrison saw it too. She's not going anywhere, he repeated, stepping in front of Ayana. If you want to question her, you do it here, in front of witnesses. That's not your choice to make, the sheriff said, his patience wearing thin. Actually it is. Morrison's voice was ice cold now. This is my property. She works for me. And I'm telling you, she's not leaving. The standoff stretched out like a rope pulled tight. Ayana could see Mrs. Morrison crying quietly, could hear Thomas whimpering behind his mother's skirts. David and Rebecca looked terrified. Finally, Tom Bradley lost his temper. Damn it, Morrison, are you choosing that Indian over your own kind? I'm choosing right over wrong, Morrison replied. Something you might want to try? Sheriff Coleman's hand moved toward his gun. Don't make me arrest you too, Samuel. For what? Protecting an innocent person on my own property? For harboring a suspect in a federal crime. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Federal crime meant federal marshals, territorial courts. Real trouble that could destroy Morrison's life. Ayana stepped forward again. Please, she said, looking at Morrison. I have to go with them. It's the only way to end this. Morrison turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not just anger, but genuine fear. Fear for her. They'll hurt you, he said quietly. Maybe, but they'll definitely hurt your family if I stay. It was the hardest choice Morrison had ever faced, and Ayana could see him wrestling with it. Finally, he turned back to the sheriff. If she goes with you, Morrison said slowly, I go too. As her employer, I have the right to be present during any questioning. Sheriff Coleman looked like he had bitten into something sour. That's unusual, but legal, Morrison pressed. You know it's legal. The sheriff looked around at his deputies, at the angry townsman, at Morrison's determined face. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. Fine, but she comes now, and you don't interfere with our investigation. As they prepared to leave, Morrison caught Ayana's arm gently. Whatever they ask you, tell the truth. Don't try to protect anyone, including me. Just tell the truth. Yes, sir, and Ayana? No matter what happens in town, you still have a place here. Do you understand me? Ayana nodded, not trusting her voice. As she climbed into the sheriff's wagon, she could see Mrs. Morrison watching from the porch, her face a mixture of fear and something that might have been regret. The ride to town was silent except for the creaking of wagon wheels and the thunder of hoofbeats. But Ayana wasn't alone. Morrison rode beside the wagon on his horse, his jaw set like granite, ready to face whatever storm was coming. For the first time since coming to the ranch, Ayana truly understood what Morrison had meant when he said, he kept his word. He wasn't just protecting her because of their business arrangement. He was protecting her because it was the right thing to do. No matter what it cost him. The question was, would doing the right thing be enough to save either of them? The jail cell in town was smaller than Ayana's room at the ranch, with stone walls that seemed to press in on her from all sides. She had been there for 3 days now, and Morrison's protection could only go so far. Sheriff Coleman had finally put his foot down about letting Morrison stay during the actual interrogation. This is official business, the sheriff had said. You can visit during regular hours like anyone else. But Morrison had visited every day, bringing food and clean clothes, sitting with Ayana for the few minutes the sheriff allowed. Each time, she could see the strain wearing on him. How are things at the ranch? She asked during his latest visit. Morrison's jaw tightened. People are talking. That was putting it mildly. The whole territory was buzzing with the story of Samuel Morrison, the white rancher who had defied the sheriff to protect an Apache girl. Some folks called him crazy. Others whispered darker things about his motives. The consequences were swift and brutal. 3 business partners had ended their deals with Morrison. The bank had called in a loan early, forcing him to sell cattle at a loss to meet the payment. Mrs. Morrison couldn't show her face in town without facing cold stares and whispered comments. Rebecca asked me why people are being mean to us, Morrison told Ayanna quietly. I didn't know what to tell her. Tell her the truth, Ayanna said. That you're doing what you think is right. Is it right? Morrison asked, and she heard the doubt creeping into his voice. My own wife barely speaks to me. My children are afraid to go to school because of what the other kids say. Maybe I should have just let you go with them that first day. Ayanna felt like she had been punched. You regret protecting me? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. I regret that protecting you is hurting everyone I love. The words hung between them like a wall. Ayanna understood then that she hadn't just brought trouble to Morrison. She had brought a choice that was tearing his family apart. That evening, Sheriff Coleman came to her cell with news that made everything worse. Found something interesting at Jake Wilson's place, he said, settling into a chair across from her cell. Your boss's foreman had some cattle in his pen that don't match his brand. Ayanna's heart sank. Jake Wilson was Morrison's head ranch hand, a man Morrison trusted completely. Turns out old Jake's been supplementing his income by rustling cattle from neighboring ranches, the sheriff continued, including Tom Bradley's. Then you know I had nothing to do with it, Ayanna said. Well, that's where it gets complicated. Sheriff Coleman leaned back in his chair. See, Jake claims he wasn't working alone. Says he had help from someone who knew the area real well, someone who could move around without being noticed. Ayanna's blood turned cold. He's lying. Maybe, but he's willing to testify that you were his partner. Says you scouted targets for him, helped plan the raids. That's impossible. Mr. Morrison can tell you I was at the ranch every night. Morrison would say anything to protect you. Everyone knows that. The sheriff studied her face. Jake's offering to make a deal. He'll take a light sentence in exchange for testifying against you. Ayanna slumped against the stone wall. Jake Wilson was sacrificing her to save himself, and there was nothing she could do about it. Her word against his, and everyone already believed the worst about her. Why would he lie about me? Sheriff Coleman shrugged. Maybe he figures better to blame an Indian than face the full consequences himself? Or maybe he's telling the truth. Either way, it doesn't look good for you. That night, Ayanna barely slept. She kept thinking about Morrison's family, about how much worse this would get for them. Mrs. Morrison had already lost her place in society. The children were suffering at school, and Morrison himself was being destroyed, piece by piece, all because he had chosen to protect her. The next morning brought Morrison's daily visit, but this time he looked different. Older, worn down by the weight of everything that was happening. I talked to a lawyer in Phoenix, he said without preamble. He says Jake's testimony, combined with the evidence they found, could be enough to convict you, Ayanna nodded. She had expected as much. But there might be another way, Morrison continued, his voice careful. If you were to disappear. Before the trial, the case would go away. The heat would die down. My family could go back to normal. Ayanna stared at him. You want me to run? I want you to live, Morrison said firmly. I've seen what they do to Indians who get convicted of cattle rustling. I won't let that happen to you. But if I run, people will say it proves I was guilty. Let them say it. You'll be alive and free. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, processing what Morrison was really offering. He was willing to sacrifice his own reputation completely to save her life, even if it meant everyone would believe he had been harboring a criminal. What about your family? She asked. Morrison's face crumpled slightly. Margaret barely looks at me anymore. She thinks I've lost my mind over you, the children. God, Ayanna, they're paying for my choices every single day. Then maybe it's time I stopped letting them pay. That evening, Sheriff Coleman brought Ayanna another visitor, Jake Wilson himself. The foreman looked nervous and wouldn't meet her eyes. Just wanted to explain, Jake said awkwardly. It ain't personal, you understand? I got a family to think about. So does Mr. Morrison, Ayanna replied coldly. Yeah, well, Morrison made his choice when he decided to trust an Indian over his own kind. Ayanna studied Jake's face, seeing the fear and desperation there. He was a man backed into a corner, lashing out at the easiest target. But something in his manner, the way he kept glancing around nervously, made her think there was more to this story. Jake, she said quietly, what really happened to those cattle? I told you, we stole them together. No, what really happened? Before you decided to blame me. Jake's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. But Ayanna did know, suddenly and completely. Jake Wilson hadn't just stolen cattle, he had done something worse. Something that would destroy Morrison if it came to light. And now he was using her as a shield to protect himself and Morrison both. The question was, did she have enough pieces to prove it? And if she did, would anyone believe an Apache girl over a white ranch foreman? As Jake left, muttering uncomfortable goodbyes, Ayanna began to plan. Morrison had offered to help her escape, but she had a better idea. Instead of running from the truth, she was going to find it, even if it meant risking everything Morrison had already sacrificed to protect her. Ayanna spent her fourth night in jail putting together pieces of a puzzle that had been right in front of everyone. Jake Wilson's nervousness, his desperate need to blame someone else, the way he kept looking around like he expected to be caught. It all pointed to something bigger than simple cattle rustling. The next morning, when Morrison came for his daily visit, Ayanna was ready. I need you to check something for me, she said urgently. Jake's been selling cattle to the army post, right? For the government contracts? Morrison nodded. He handles all those transactions. Why? How often does he go to the post? And does he always come back with the right amount of money? Morrison's eyes narrowed. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Jake's been stealing from you for a lot longer than anyone knows. Not just cattle, money too. And when he got caught rustling Bradley's cattle, he needed someone to blame fast. Morrison was quiet for a moment, processing this. You think he's been cheating on the army contracts? I think Jake Wilson is more desperate than he wants anyone to know. And desperate men do stupid things. Morrison left quickly, and Ayanna could only wait and hope. If she was wrong, she would. Hang for crimes she didn't commit. If she was right, the truth might finally set everyone free. 2 hours later, Sheriff Coleman burst into the jail with Morrison right behind him. The sheriff's face was thunderous. You've been holding the wrong person, Morrison announced. Jake. Wilson's been skimming money from the army contracts for over a year, Sheriff Coleman said, his voice tight with anger. When I confronted him with the evidence Morrison found, he broke down and confessed everything. Ayanna felt weak with relief. What about the cattle rustling? He did that too, but he was working alone. He lied about you because he figured nobody would believe an Indian's word over his. The sheriff unlocked her cell door. You're free. To go, as they walked out of the jail, Morrison explained what he had found. Jake had been doctoring the books on army sales for months, reporting lower prices than he actually received and pocketing the difference. When he got caught stealing cattle, he panicked and blamed Ayanna, hoping to disappear in the chaos. The army's pressing charges for fraud, Morrison said. Jake's looking at federal prison time. What about the people who wanted me convicted? Ayanna asked. Morrison's face hardened. They're going to have to live with the fact that they were ready to hang an innocent person. Some of them are feeling pretty ashamed right now. Not all of them, though. As they walked through town toward Morrison's wagon, Ayanna could feel hostile stares following her. Some people would never admit they were wrong, would never accept that an Apache girl could be innocent when they needed her to be guilty, but something had changed in the way Morrison carried himself. His shoulders were straighter, his jaw more determined. He had fought for what was right and won, and it showed. The ride back to the ranch was quiet until Morrison finally spoke. I owe you an apology, he said. For what? For doubting. For thinking. Maybe I should have just let them take you that first day. Ayanna shook her head. You were worried about your family. That's not wrong. My family needed to see me do the right thing, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Morrison. glanced at her. You showed me what real courage looks like. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Morrison was waiting on the porch with the children. Her face was pale, but determined. She walked down to meet them as they climbed out of the wagon. I owe you an apology too, she said to Ayanna. I let fear make me selfish. I was more worried about what people would think than about what was right. You were protecting your children, Ayanna replied. I understand that. No, I was protecting my reputation, Mrs. Morrison said firmly. There's a difference. Rebecca ran forward and hugged Ayanna tightly. I knew you didn't steal anything. I told everyone at school they were wrong about you. Even David, the proud teenager, looked relieved to see her back. Town's been pretty boring without all the drama, he said with a slight smile that evening. The Morrison family gathered for dinner as they always did, but this time Ayanna was invited to eat with them at the main table instead of in the kitchen. Afterward, it was a small gesture, but it meant everything. So what happens now? Mrs. Morrison asked as they finished their meal. Your 2 years are almost up. Ayanna had been thinking about that a lot lately. I don't know. I haven't heard from my family in months. Morrison cleared his throat. Actually, I have a proposition for you. He explained his idea slowly, carefully. The territory was changing, he said. The old ways of doing things, keeping Apache and white communities separate and suspicious, weren't working. There were opportunities for someone who understood both worlds to help bridge the gap. I want to offer you a partnership, Morrison said. Not as a servant, but as an equal. You'd help manage trade relationships between the ranch and the reservation. Work with other ranchers who want to do business fairly with Apache communities. It wouldn't be easy, Mrs. Morrison added. Some people will never accept it, but Samuel's right, things are changing. Ayanna was stunned. You're offering me a real job, as a partner? I'm offering you a chance to help build something new. Morrison said, a way for our communities to work together instead of against each other. The next week, Ayanna rode to the reservation to see her family and share the news. Koda was tall and healthy now, almost a man at 14. Her parents looked older, but proud when she told them about Morrison's offer. You've grown wise, daughter, her mother said. Wiser than when you left us. Will you take this white man's offer? Her father asked. I think I will, Ayanna said. Not because I owe him anything anymore, but because it's a chance to build bridges instead of walls. A month later, Ayanna officially became Morrison's partner in what they called the Cross-Cultural Trading Company. It was a grand name for a simple idea. Fair business between Apache and white communities. The work wasn't easy. Many ranchers remained suspicious of Apache traders. Some Apache families didn't trust white business practices. But slowly, one deal at a time, they built a network of relationships based on mutual respect and honest dealing, too. Years after that desperate morning when Ayanna had walked up Morrison's driveway with nothing but hope and determination, she stood in his office as an equal partner, planning their next venture. Do you ever regret it? Morrison asked one day. The choice you made that morning? Ayanna thought about everything that had happened, the hardship, the loneliness, the danger, but also the growth, the relationships, the opportunities that never would have existed otherwise. I offered to work to repay you, she said with a smile. I never imagined I'd end up helping you build a new kind of future. Morrison nodded, looking out at the land that now represented not just his ranch, but a model for how different communities could thrive together. Sometimes, he said, the best deals are the ones nobody saw coming. As the sun set over the Arizona territory, Ayanna reflected on how far she had traveled from that desperate morning 2 years ago. She had set out to save her family and ended up discovering that sometimes when you're brave enough to bridge two worlds, you don't just change your own fate, you change everyone's.